The moon hung low on the horizon, casting long, sinister shadows across the deserted highway. James had been driving for hours, the tires of his old pickup truck humming on the asphalt. He was tired, his eyelids heavy, and the solitude of the road weighed on him like a shroud. The radio, his only companion, crackled with static as he rounded a bend. His headlights swept over a lone figure on the side of the road. It was a woman, her silhouette hunched under the weight of a heavy coat. Her thumb jutted out in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. James hesitated. He'd heard the stories, the tales of phantom hitchhikers who appeared on desolate roads only to vanish into thin air. But she looked so cold and weary, and his conscience. He slowed the truck and pulled over, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. The woman approached, her face hidden beneath the hood. She swung the door open and climbed in, her breath a frosty plume in the night air. James caught a glimpse of her face, pale and gaunt, her eyes deep pools of darkness. "Thanks," she muttered, her voice a whispery rasp. "I've been waiting for a ride for hours." "Where are you headed?" James asked, trying to sound casual, but his heart raced. "Just down the road," she replied, her fingers trembling as she pointed ahead. James pulled back onto the road, the silence inside the truck oppressive. He tried to shake the unease that had settled over him, attributing it to the late hour and his overactive imagination. As they drove, the woman seemed to grow even colder. She shivered uncontrollably, her teeth chattering audibly. James reached for the heater knob, but before he could turn it up, she spoke again. "Do you mind if I borrow your coat?" she asked, her eyes fixed on his. James hesitated but then pulled off his jacket and handed it to her. She slipped it on, and her thin frame seemed to disappear into the oversized garment. As she settled in, her hand brushed against his arm, and James flinched. Her touch was icy, as if she were made of snow and frost. They continued down the highway in silence, the truck's engine a constant drone. James's anxiety grew with each passing mile. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He glanced at the woman out of the corner of his eye, but her hood still obscured her face. Finally, they reached a desolate stretch of road, surrounded by dense woods. The woman spoke again, her voice hushed and urgent. "Stop the truck," she said, her fingers gripping the jacket tightly. James complied, pulling over to the side of the road. He turned to her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Here?" he asked, his voice trembling. She nodded, her hood slipping back to reveal her face. Her skin was ashen, her eyes hollow and empty. A chill ran down James's spine as he realized there was no longer any warmth in the truck. His breath hung in the air like a ghostly specter. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The woman's lips curled into a chilling smile, and she leaned in closer, her cold, clammy hand gripping his arm. "I want you to remember," she hissed, her breath icy against his ear. And then, in an instant, she was gone. The jacket slipped from her shoulders and fell to the seat beside him, empty. James was alone on the side of the road, the night air pressing in around him. Panicked and disoriented, James sped away, leaving the stretch of road and the haunting apparition behind. He drove for miles, the fear and confusion gnawing at him. It was only when he reached a brightly lit gas station that he pulled over and tried to make sense of what had just happened. The gas station attendant eyed him warily as James stumbled inside, his face pale and his hands shaking. "You okay, buddy?" the attendant asked. James could only manage a nod as he filled his gas tank, his mind racing with questions and dread. Had it all been a hallucination? A nightmare brought on by exhaustion and loneliness? He couldn't be sure, but one thing was certain: he would never pick up another hitchhiker again. Years passed, and James tried to put the memory behind him. He told himself it was a trick of the mind, a figment of his imagination. But the chill of that night never left him, and the image of the Phantom Hitchhiker haunted his dreams. Then, one evening, as he drove down a different, bustling highway, he saw her again. She stood on the shoulder, her thumb outstretched, her hood hiding her face. The years had not been kind to her. She seemed even paler and more frail than before. But her eyes were the same, deep pools of darkness that seemed to pierce his very soul. James sped past her, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't explain it, but he knew he had to keep driving, to put as much distance between himself and that wraith-like figure as possible. The memory of that night, of the chilling encounter on the desolate road, had never left him, and it would stay with him until the end of his days. The Phantom Hitchhiker, it seemed, was a specter that could never truly be escaped, a haunting reminder of a darkness that could descend upon even the most ordinary of nights, on the lonely list of highways